The August heat pressed down on the small coastal town like a damp blanket, the kind that clung to your skin and made the air feel heavier than it was. Derek Lawson sat in the driver's seat of his ambulance, one hand resting on the steering wheel, the other drumming a slow rhythm on his thigh. The late afternoon lull was always the hardest. Too early to call it a day, too late to expect anything but routine calls. The radio crackled, pulling him out of his thoughts. Unit 4, respond to a possible medical at the Shoreline Cafe. Elderly male, dizzy, weak, conscious, and breathing. Caller reports sudden onset. Derek's partner, Lisa McConnell, was already pulling the call slip from the dashboard slot and jotting down the details. "That's just up the block," she said, glancing at him. Derek started the engine and flicked on the lights, though he didn't bother with the siren. "Sounds like another heat exhaustion case. We've had 5 today already." The drive took less than 2 minutes, the ambulance weaving gently through light traffic, before pulling up in front of the small, family-owned cafe. Its big glass windows reflected the pale blue sky, and inside, people sat at wooden tables under the soft hum of ceiling fans. As soon as they stepped through the door, the smell of fresh coffee and baked bread washed over them. A young waitress waved them over urgently. "Over here. He's at the back table." In the far corner, a man in his early 70s sat slouched slightly, one hand resting on the edge of the table, the other loosely gripping a half-empty glass of water. He was neatly dressed in light gray slacks, a pressed pale blue shirt, and polished brown loafers. His silver hair was combed back, his posture controlled despite the apparent discomfort. Lisa's pace quickened, medical bags swinging at her side. Derek followed, but his steps were more measured. He glanced at the man from a distance, scanning for signs of distress. Labored breathing, obvious pain, skin pallor. The man looked tired, yes, but not in crisis. "Sir, I'm Derek. This is Lisa," Derek said when they reached the table. "Can you tell me what's going on?" The man's voice was calm, though slightly breathless. "I started feeling lightheaded about 15 minutes ago. Short of breath, it hasn't gone away." Derek's eyes narrowed slightly. "Any chest pain?" "A little pressure," the man admitted. Lisa was already setting the bag down and pulling out the blood pressure cuff, but Derek raised a hand, signaling her to wait. His tone was casual, almost dismissive. "Could be the heat. Could be dehydration. You're sitting upright, talking clearly. Not exactly emergency territory." The man studied him quietly for a moment, his expression unreadable. "I'd still feel better if you checked me." Derek crossed his arms. "We've got other calls waiting. If this turns out to be nothing, you're looking at an expensive ambulance ride for no reason." The man didn't argue, didn't plead. He simply gave a small nod, the kind that could be resignation, or something else entirely. Derek didn't notice the faint spark of curiosity in Lisa's eyes, or the way a couple of nearby patrons were watching closely. Their conversations paused mid-sentence. All he knew was that he'd decided this was a low-priority call. What he didn't know was that this decision was about to turn his day, and maybe his career, upside down. The air in the cafe seemed to grow still after Derek's words. Lisa froze with the blood pressure cuff in her hands, looking between Derek and the older man as though she wasn't sure she'd heard correctly. The man set his glass down carefully, his fingers steady. "I understand resources are limited," he said in the same calm tone, "but I've been feeling this way for several minutes. It's unsettling." Lisa stepped in. "Derek, it's literally 2 minutes to run vitals. We can figure out if this is serious right here." Derek shook his head slightly, his lips tightening. "Lisa, we've been chasing heat fatigue all day. It's the same story over and over. Older person, a little dizzy, maybe short of breath. 90% of the time, it's nothing urgent." He turned back to the man. "Sir, unless you're having crushing chest pain or you're about to lose consciousness, this doesn't seem like a priority case." The murmur of the cafe's patrons had grown noticeably louder, and Derek could feel their eyes on him. A man at a nearby table muttered something under his breath, but Derek ignored it. He'd been doing this job long enough to trust his gut, and his gut told him this man wasn't in immediate danger. The older man tilted his head slightly, as though studying Derek the way a teacher might study a student who'd just given a wrong answer. "So, you're saying you won't check me?" "I'm saying," Derek replied evenly, "that if you want a full workup, the ER is the right place. but calling an ambulance for something mild could mean we're not available for someone in actual crisis. Lisa bit the inside of her cheek, clearly holding back a response. She knelt down anyway, setting the medical bag back on the floor, but Derek gave her a small shake of his head. Sir, Derek continued, if you think you can get to the ER on your own, that might be your best option. The man gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. Not warm, not mocking, but curious. I see. He leaned back in his chair, folded his hands, and said nothing more. Derek took the silence as acquiescence. All right then. If you change your mind, call us again. He glanced at Lisa, who reluctantly packed the cuff back into the bag. The walk to the door felt longer than the walk in. Derek could hear low voices behind him, but no one stopped them. The bell above the door chimed as they stepped back into the humid air. Lisa looked at him sharply. That didn't feel right. Trust me, Derek said as they headed toward the ambulance. This was nothing. It would take less than 2 minutes for him to find out exactly how wrong he was. The ambulance door slammed shut behind Derek, and he slid into the driver's seat, already reaching for his clipboard. The call had been quick, and in his mind, it barely qualified as one. A couple of quick notes for the log. No transport, patient refused further evaluation, and they could be back in service. Lisa climbed in on the passenger side, still looking uneasy. You sure about that call? She asked, buckling her seatbelt. Derek started to answer, but the radio crackled to life, interrupting him. Unit 4, come in. He picked up the handset. Unit 4, go ahead. The dispatcher's voice had a clipped, oddly formal tone. Be advised, the patient at the Shoreline Cafe is part of an authorized federal evaluation. This was a staged medical scenario. Derek frowned, confused. Staged scenario? There was a pause, then the dispatcher added, confirming identification now. Stand by. Lisa's eyebrows rose. What the hell does that mean? Before Derek could answer, the radio crackled again. Unit 4, identity confirmed. The patient is Dr. Alan Hayes, United States Surgeon General. Repeat, Surgeon General. Part of a surprise field audit on emergency medical response. The words hit like a hammer. Derek's hand froze on the radio mic, his mind replaying the last 10 minutes in vivid, unflattering detail. The folded arms, the clipped tone, the refusal to even check vitals. Lisa's mouth dropped open. You're kidding me. That was the Surgeon General? Derek's pulse kicked up a notch. Dr. Alan Hayes, the man who'd spent decades as one of the country's most respected public health figures, the face of countless campaigns about preventive care, the kind of person who could make or break a paramedic's career with a single line in a report, had just been sitting in that cafe, asking for help. And Derek had walked away. The radio came alive once more. Unit 4, the evaluation team requests your return to the cafe for follow-up. Derek's throat felt dry. He glanced at Lisa, who gave a short, almost incredulous laugh. Well, she said, you wanted to make this shift interesting. Derek started the engine again, but this time, the short drive back to the cafe felt like it took miles. Every turn of the wheels seemed to drum the same thought into his head. You didn't just ignore a patient. You ignored the Surgeon General. When the cafe came into view again, Derek knew the next few minutes could change everything. Not just his day, but the way his superiors saw him, and maybe even whether he kept his job. The short ride back to the cafe felt like a crawl through quicksand. Derek kept his hands locked on the steering wheel, his knuckles pale, his jaw tight. Lisa sat in silence beside him, glancing out the window as if preparing for the awkward scene to come. The only sound was the hum of the engine and the faint rattle of gear in the back. As the cafe came into view, Derek's stomach tightened. The same people were still inside. The scene barely changed. Except now, there was a different kind of energy. Through the window, he saw several customers, glancing toward the door even before he parked, as though expecting his return. He killed the engine, slid the keys into his pocket, and stepped out into the warm, heavy air. Lisa followed, medical bag slung over her shoulder this time, no hesitation in her stride. The doorbell chimed as they stepped inside. Conversations dimmed. The scent of coffee and fresh pastries was the same, but the atmosphere was entirely different. Taut, watchful. At the same corner table, Dr. Alan Hayes sat just as before, posture upright, hands folded neatly on the table. The glass of water in front of him was now empty. condensation pooling in a faint ring on the wood. His expression was calm, but his eyes were sharper now, assessing. Derek approached, feeling every set of eyes in the room on his back. "Sir," he began, his voice lower than before. "I understand I misjudged the situation earlier. I—" Dr. Hayes held up a hand, silencing him with the simple gesture. "Mr. Lawson, is it?" His tone was not unkind, but carried the weight of someone accustomed to being listened to. "Yes, sir," Derek replied, straightening instinctively. "I'm sure your dispatcher explained who I am," Hayes said, his gaze steady. "Yes," Derek admitted. "The Surgeon General." A faint smile touched Hayes's lips, the kind that was more acknowledgement than amusement. "Titles aside, you should know that I don't expect special treatment. What I do expect, and what the public expects, is that every person who calls for emergency help gets the benefit of your full professional attention, regardless of how they appear." Derek swallowed, his mind flicking back to his own words from earlier. "You're sitting up, talking. That's not critical." They sounded worse now, echoing in this quiet room. Hayes went on, still composed. "When someone says they're experiencing symptoms, dizziness, shortness of breath, chest pressure, you're not there to decide whether they look sick enough. You're there to assess them properly." Lisa shifted beside Derek, her eyes fixed on Hayes. "We'd like to do that now, sir," she said, unzipping the medical bag. Hayes looked between them for a moment, then gave a small nod. "By all means. Let's see how you handle it when you start from the right place." As Lisa knelt to begin the vitals check, Derek stood a little straighter, the weight of the moment pressing in. This wasn't just about one patient anymore. It was about the standard he'd set for himself, and how far he'd just fallen short of it. Lisa moved with quiet efficiency, slipping the blood pressure cuff over Dr. Hayes' arm, while Derek stood close by, his hands clasped behind his back. The room remained hushed, the only sound the rhythmic hiss of the cuff inflating and the faint clink of silverware from a table across the room. "Blood pressure, 122/78, Lisa read aloud. "Oxygen saturation 98%, pulse 72, steady." "Excellent numbers," Hayes said, giving her a nod of approval. Then he turned his gaze to Derek. "And none of them," he added softly, "were numbers you could have guessed from across the room." Derek felt his stomach twist. The truth of it landed hard. There was no way he could have known without checking. Yet, he'd decided anyway. Hayes leaned back slightly, his voice calm but pointed. "Mr. Lawson, in this job, you are the first line between someone's complaint and the care that might save their life. Every assumption you make without evidence is a door you close. Sometimes that door stays closed forever." Lisa kept packing the equipment, her eyes flicking up at Derek briefly. She didn't have to say anything. The look in her eyes said it all. "He's right, and you know it." Derek cleared his throat. "You're right, sir. I was wrong to dismiss your symptoms." Hayes' brow furrowed slightly. "It's not just about me. You carry your experience like a shield. That's common in this field. But shields can block the wrong things. If you start deciding who deserves attention based on a hunch or how busy your day is, you stop being a medic and start being a gatekeeper." The word gatekeeper hit Derek harder than expected. He'd always seen himself as the guy who showed up, who helped. The idea that he might be keeping people from getting care, even unintentionally, made his chest tighten. Hayes took a slow sip of water, then set the glass down with deliberate care. "I've been to disaster zones, ERs on the brink of collapse, rural clinics with one doctor for hundreds of miles. The best responders I've seen never let cynicism replace compassion. Even when 90% of calls are nothing, they give the 100th the same attention as the first." Derek didn't have an answer. Not yet. Hayes glanced between them, his expression softening slightly. "The fact that you're back here now, owning the mistake, means there's still something to work with. I'd like to believe you'll take this to heart." Derek nodded once, the weight of the moment settling in his chest. "I will." The cafe was quiet, but Derek could feel that everyone in the room had heard the exchange. It wasn't just a professional correction. It was a public one, and he knew that made it sting even more. The numbers were recorded, the medical kit was zipped shut, but the air between Derek and Dr. Hayes was still thick with unspoken consequences. Lisa straightened, tucking her pen into her pocket, and took a deliberate step back. giving the two men space. Hayes folded his hands on the table, his eyes never leaving Derek. Mr. Lawson, I'm going to be honest with you. My job doesn't just involve speeches, policies, and press conferences. It involves evaluating, in real time, how our medical infrastructure functions when no one's looking. That's what today was about. Derek swallowed hard. And I failed that evaluation. Hayes's mouth curved in a faint, unreadable smile. Let's say you made a choice that revealed where your blind spots are. That phrasing stung more than a flat yes would have. Blind spots meant habits, ingrained thinking he hadn't even realized was there. Hayes leaned forward slightly. I've been doing this long enough to know that mistakes happen. But what matters is what happens after the mistake. There are two kinds of responders, the ones who double down and the ones who learn. Derek shifted his weight from one foot to the other, aware of how quiet the cafe had become again. Even the hiss of the espresso machine had faded, as if the barista didn't want to interrupt. I'm not going to make promises I can't keep, Derek said. But I can tell you this. I'll never walk away from a call like that again. Even if I think it's nothing, I'll check. Hayes regarded him for a moment, as though weighing the truth of the statement. Good, he said finally. Because in my official report, I will note what happened today. But I will also note whether you showed the capacity to adapt in the moment. Lisa let out a slow breath, a subtle release of tension. Sir, if you'd allow, we can offer you transport now, just to close this loop properly. Hayes shook his head. Not necessary. My vitals are fine, and this was never about me needing a hospital. It was about seeing how you operate under pressure, without the safety net of knowing who I am. Derek nodded slowly. Understood. Hayes pushed his chair back, standing with the deliberate pace of someone who commanded authority, even in the smallest movements. You have experience, Lawson. Don't let it calcify into cynicism. It's a dangerous habit, and one I've seen end careers. The words weren't loud, but they landed heavy. Derek didn't flinch this time. I hear you. Hayes gave a final nod, then reached for his jacket draped over the back of the chair. Then we'll see if you mean it. As Hayes walked toward the door, the patron's eyes followed him. Derek stood rooted to the spot, feeling the mix of relief and unease swirl in his chest. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The late afternoon light was beginning to turn gold as Derek and Lisa stepped out of the cafe. The heat was still there, clinging to their uniforms, but Derek hardly noticed it now. His mind was running through the conversation with Dr. Hayes, replaying every word, every pause, every subtle tone shift. They loaded the gear back into the ambulance in silence. Lisa finally broke it with a low whistle. Well, she said, that's a shift I'll remember for a while. Derek didn't answer right away. He was thinking about the phrase Hayes had used, blind spots. He'd prided himself on his instincts for years, but instincts, he realized, could get lazy. They could calcify into snap judgments, disguised as experience. The radio crackled before he could say anything. Unit 4, respond to a possible medical at Riverside Park. Female, mid-60s, reports dizziness and weakness. Conscious, alert, breathing. The words were eerily similar to the call they'd just had. Lisa glanced at him with raised eyebrows, waiting to see how he'd react. Derek didn't hesitate. He turned the key, the engine roaring to life. Lights and siren. Let's move. Lisa smiled faintly. Copy that. At Riverside Park, families were packing up picnic blankets as the sun dipped lower. Near a shaded bench, a woman with short gray hair sat leaning slightly forward, one hand pressed against her temple. A young man, maybe her son, stood beside her, looking worried. Derek grabbed the medical bag himself this time, striding over without a second's delay. Ma'am, I'm Derek. This is Lisa. We're going to check you out right now. Can you tell me what you're feeling? The woman's voice trembled slightly. Just lightheaded and a little nauseous. Derek was already kneeling beside her, snapping the blood pressure cuff into place. Any chest pain? Shortness of breath? No chest pain, she said, just dizzy. Her blood pressure came back low, and Derek immediately started an oxygen check. Lisa, let's get her some water and see if she can tolerate it. We'll keep monitoring in case this escalates. The woman's son looked relieved. Thank you for taking this seriously. We weren't sure if it was worth calling. Derek met his gaze. If you're worried enough to wonder, It's worth checking. Every time. Back in the ambulance. The woman stabilized quickly, and they arranged a safe ride for her to the hospital for further evaluation. As Derek climbed into the driver's seat afterward, Lisa gave him a knowing look. Bit different from Shoreline Cafe, huh? She said. Very different, Derek replied, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. He didn't say it out loud, but he knew the change wasn't just for the report Hayes would write. It was for himself. The sting of that first refusal would never quite go away. But maybe that was the point. It would be the constant reminder to slow down, check, and listen. As they drove away, the sun finally dipped below the horizon, casting the town in a warm orange glow. Derek felt the weight in his chest ease just a little. Some lessons hurt in the moment, but they were worth carrying, because the next patient deserved better than the last mistake.